you all for being here today. Um, so the name of this presentation's Immigration Under the New Administration, What We Know So Far, because the new administration's only been in effect for about 60 days. So I'll let you know what we do know so far, but also a lot of things that we don't know yet, just because it's so new. So just to give you a little rundown of what I'll speak about, first I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how changes in immigration even happen, because it might give you a better understanding of just how long things might take or how quickly things might go. Then I'll give you an idea of the current state of the New York, New Jersey immigration courts and asylum offices. There's some asylum updates that might be of interest to some of you, might apply to some of you, so we'll talk about that. Then I'm going to very quickly talk about the public charge rule, which doesn't really apply to asylum seekers, but could apply if potentially you might be changing your status based on something other than asylum, if you've been waiting for a long time. And finally, we'll talk about TPS, which was announced recently for Venezuela, as you all know, but also for Burma. So it's for both. Both of those were recently designated. Okay. So first is the legislative process. So I think you need to think about immigration law as three things. There are immigration laws which take a very long time to change. That's done through Congress. Then there's immigration rules, which are how just the Department of Homeland Security basically implements these rules. And then finally, there's policies, basically executive orders, and those things happen quite quickly. But the legislative process, when we're talking about something like amnesty or something about changing the one-year filing deadline, these are in the law. And when something's in the law, it can't be changed so quickly. So it has to pass both houses first. So it has to pass both the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And just passing one house is not enough. It has to pass both houses. So, I know that there's been some immigration legislation that's passed the House of Representatives, which is predominantly Democrat, but that doesn't mean it's going to become law until it goes also to the Senate. And then after it goes to the Senate, and then needs to be signed by the president, and then it needs to be implemented. And a lot of negotiations can take place. So I think just because something passes the House of Representatives, there really can't be an expectation that it's going to actually be law until it is law. And it's important to remember that until a law is actually signed by the president, the old laws remain in place. So that might be something, for example, the one-year filing deadline for asylum, it's in the law. So something like that to change would be an example of something that might take the longest. There's also rulemaking. So there's a bunch of immigration laws, but then the way in which these laws are actually implemented, this is rulemaking, and this goes through the Department of Homeland Security. So for an example, the changes to how employment authorization documents are issued, right? The change from it becoming 6 months to 1 year, that was not done through law, but that was done through a rule. And rules are easier to change than laws, but there's still a process that it has to go through. You'll probably remember for the employment authorization documents for the work permits, when it changed from 6 months to a year, or 150 days to a year, it didn't happen overnight. There was a notice of rulemaking, and then the rule was implemented. So these rules exist right now. So in order for them to be revoked, or revoked means canceled, or in order for it to be amended, it also has to go through a rulemaking process. It can't just happen overnight. So the administration can't just change it immediately, but also needs to go through this process. It's a lot faster than legislation, but certainly also takes time. So that's just something else to consider. And then finally, there are executive orders or proclamations. These are things that the president can just designate, or these are things that the Secretary of Homeland Security can designate. This, I should have also probably put policies here. So these are things that can happen more quickly, but they tend to be things that ban people rather than giving a benefit to people, because a lot of proclamations are based on restricting immigration. So for example, the COVID-19 bans. But on the other hand, there are other things that can be done by policy and that can be done pretty quickly. Like, so for example, you know, the Secretary of Homeland Security designated TPS. That was not something that needed to go through anything. They were just able to designate it. Another thing which is a matter of policy, for example, is the scheduling at the asylum offices. So we'll talk more about scheduling at asylum offices, but that is something that they could change if they wish to change it, but we'll discuss that. And that wouldn't have to go through any rulemaking. So I just bring that up to sort of think about, you know, we're only, I'm sorry, and then finally, there's also court decisions. So there were a lot of really bad court decisions that were made under the Trump administration, and these court decisions are still the law. And they're not going to stop being the law unless there's a case that overrules it, or in a lot of these cases, what happened was the Attorney General took these cases himself and made decisions on it. So that whole process is also going to happen to make changes to asylum. So so again, so in short, it's going to take time for there to be a lot of changes to asylum. The lawmaking process takes a while. The rulemaking process takes less time, but also takes a while. Policy changes certainly can happen more quickly, but can take time. And then, you know, we are bound by court decisions. So, you know, it was 4 years of really a lot of new rules and a lot of bad decisions being made, and we still have to live with that under the Biden administration for the time being. So yes, hopefully things will change, and there have been some really positive changes that have already happened. But I guess just keep remembering we've only had 60 days in this new administration, and there was 4 years of the old administration that needs to be undone or changed or amended. Okay. So just with that being said, let's talk a little bit about very specific things dealing with asylum. And honestly, not much has changed so far. In terms of immigration, the New York immigration courts are still closed. They're closed until May 14th of this year, and potentially will continue being closed. So if you have a hearing scheduled in New York, Broadway or 26 Federal Plaza, up and through May 14th, it's going to be rescheduled. Okay. The Newark Immigration Court is open. Newark and New York asylum offices are also open, and they're interviewing, although they're interviewing still at a reduced capacity due to the pandemic. Okay. So a lot of your questions were, why is my asylum case taking so long to be interviewed? The majority of you, at least from a poll, looked like you have cases waiting to be interviewed at the asylum office. This goes back to a policy change that was implemented in January 2018, and it's a policy, So it could be changed, right? It doesn't have to go through this whole process to be changed. But in January 2018, there was a policy called last in, first out. So that means, as many of you know, they're prioritizing the most recent cases first. And if you don't get interviewed right away, you end up on this sort of backlog. And some people have gotten their interviews within 6 weeks, and some people have been waiting 6 years for an interview due to this policy. This is still the policy up until now. I don't have any information as to whether they're going to change it to a to the other way around, because what it used to be was you filed and then it went in order, right? But I think it's also important to know that even in the old policy, there were very, very long wait times. It wasn't necessarily that quick. It used to pretty much be when you filed for asylum in New York City, it would take about 3.5 years for you to have your interview under the old policy. What was good about it is that at least you knew when you were going to have your case, right? And it became very long around 2014 when there was a lot of youth, a lot of unaccompanied minors who came to the US, and they had received priority for their applications for their asylum interviews, and that kind of started delaying things. So there's definite problems with the last in, first out policy, but just to think about, if they switch back to the old policy, it may not benefit you. Because let's say you filed your case in 2019 and they changed the policy, they're going to go back then to January to 2016, where they're at right now, and go through all of those cases until they come to you. So I don't know, you know, at this point, I don't know what they're going to be doing, but it's just to think about. It's either going to be this policy if they continue with it, or the other policy, but the wait times might still be significant for you no matter what. It would certainly benefit you if they change it, if you have a case kind of just waiting there since January 2016, January 2017. But if you have a newer case and you more recently filed and they change this policy, you can expect to still have long wait times until your case is interviewed. You know, of course, unless there's a change in the law, unless they hire more asylum officers, unless they, you know, do amnesty, which is, of course, what we all hope will happen, but we would see if that actually happens. So in the meantime, there are a couple things you can do. If your case is at the Newark office, so that means if you're in Manhattan or the Bronx, your case is scheduled at the Newark Asylum Office, and you can email the Newark Asylum Office to be put on a short list. Being put on a short list means if an interview slot opens up, you know, they would contact you and you would be able to go. There's some negatives to doing this, mainly that you have to be ready to go once they call you. So you want to have your asylum application complete and ready if this is what you do. But that's something you could do at Newark. It's something that's not possible in New York, at the New York office in Long Island. And the other thing to think about, especially if you've been waiting since 2016, 2017, is to request an expedited interview. If there's a humanitarian need for an interview as soon as possible, they may grant this to you. I recently did this with a client and it was granted. Although I feel like she had really strong humanitarian factors, namely that she was separated from a child who was in her home country, and she had been waiting for a number of years to be able to get this interview, and the child was young, and there were some other things. So it's a case-by-case basis, but it's certainly not impossible to get an expedited interview approved, so long as you have a compelling reason. And I think if you want to think what is a compelling reason, you want to think, what about your case stands out from everyone else who's waiting, right? Because everyone has a compelling reason to want an interview as soon as possible. Of course, you all want to have an asylum interview as soon as possible, but what about your situation sticks out that might make the asylum office give you an interview sooner? So, but as of now, last in, first out, it's the same policy. Okay. There's something called the Mendez-Rojas settlement. This might apply to you if you're in court and you did not file your asylum application within 1 year because you didn't receive written notice that you needed to file it within 1 year. I'm not going to go into all the specifics about this, but if you missed your 1 year filing deadline and you were issued an NTA, you were issued to go to court right away, sometime between June 30th, 2016 and 1/20/2021, it might apply to you and you might be able to get over the 1 year filing deadline. So if you have an attorney and this is your situation, ask them about it, Mendez-Rojas settlement, or we could certainly maybe talk about it if you think this applies to you. Okay, EADs. So this new asylum EAD rule where you need to wait a year is still in effect as of now. It hasn't changed, it's still the rule. However, if any of you have just filed your asylum applications, you should definitely become a member of ASAP. It is very easy to become a member of ASAP. You go online and you can become a member of it. And as soon as you become a member of ASAP, you're able to file your employment authorization document application within 150 days, and it's still free. And you should get your EAD within 30 days after applying. And it works. Some people have not been getting their EADs within the 30 days. You need to call. You have to call the USCIS Customer Service Center. You need to speak with somebody, and you can call after 25 days. I did this for a client and it worked. His got approved the next day. You're known as something called the Rosario class. So they have a whole thing for, there's something called the Rosario class, and they will put in a service request for you and they'll make a decision on your case, but you have to call to get it moving forward. And I guess I wouldn't expect them. I don't know how other people's experiences have been, if they've been getting it right away or not. For my client, we didn't get it and I had to call. So it might just be something that you need to do to get things moving forward. But once you put in that service request, it works. So at least there's that in the meantime. And this might be a rule that's revoked. It's a rule, so it's not something that's going to be so hard to revoke if they want to revoke it. I'm not sure if this applies really to anyone, but asylum agreements with Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala have been rescinded, which is good news. So they can't return people to those countries if they pass through them. Okay, very quickly, I just want to talk about public charge. The public charge rule has been revoked. The new public charge rule. Public charge always never applied to asylum, but some of you may have been here a while now, and some of you may be married now and may be thinking about adjusting status, and we're concerned about public charge. So public charge no longer, the public charge rule now is they will only look at cash assistance, if you received any cash assistance, or if you were hospitalized long-term, as a negative factor for public charge. So it went back to its old 1999 rules. Again, it's not really relevant to asylum, but if you were planning to adjust through a family member or something else, since you've been here for a while, public charge is gone, which is great news. So that's one of the really great things that has happened. Okay, so TPS. So TPS, the registration period for Venezuela is March 9th till September, I can't see, because, okay, September 5th. Burma is March 11th to September 7th. And Venezuela also has deferred enforced departure, DED. So a lot of you are wondering, should I apply for TPS? It's a good question. So if you have an application, so TPS, if you're granted TPS, you are in lawful status. And when someone is in lawful status and they go for their interview at the asylum office, if your asylum case is not granted at the asylum office, there's no reason for them to then refer you to court if you're in lawful status. So that means if you apply for TPS and you register for TPS and you have an asylum application pending at the asylum office, and then you go for your interview and your asylum is not granted, your case is not going to go to court. It will just be denied because you're in lawful status and there's no reason to remove you. There's no reason to start deportation proceedings. So this might not be a good idea for you because that would mean that you only get one chance at applying for asylum. You don't have a second chance in front of an immigration judge. If you felt like your case, it's really a case-by-case thing. If you applied for asylum and you don't think you have a strong asylum case, maybe it would be worth it to apply for TPS right now. But if you have a good asylum case, cases can always get denied at the asylum office level. And if that happens and you have TPS, you're not gonna have a second chance in front of an immigration judge. So that might be a reason not to apply for TPS. You're allowed to register late for TPS if you have a pending application for asylum. So if you have a pending application for asylum, it's not necessary to register for TPS now. You can always register within 60 days of that status terminating. So it's something you want to think about. TPS is not necessarily for everyone if you have an application at the asylum office. Something else to think about, if you do have an application for asylum at the asylum office and you haven't accumulated 150 days yet for your EAD through ASAP, you can apply for an EAD through deferred enforced departure if you're Venezuelan, and that would not have an effect, the same sort of effect as TPS. It would just permit you to have employment authorization sooner. So that's an idea. Now, if you have an application at the immigration court already, it's pretty safe to apply. You can apply for TPS. Essentially, what would happen is once you have TPS, you could close your case if that's what you and your attorney want to do. You can go forward with your case, and if you're ordered removed, it doesn't matter because you're still protected by TPS. And at this point, no law has been passed that TPS will lead to a green card. That might be something in the future, but right now, it's only a possibility. Okay. And what are some barriers to TPS? Some of the asylum barriers do apply to TPS. And I think a big one might be firm resettlement. So if you're found to have been somewhere else so let's say you had departed Venezuela and you went to another country first, and you were given some sort of permanent offer to stay there, just like how that's a barrier to asylum, it's also a barrier to TPS unless you meet an exception. Dual nationality. Let's say you hold two nationalities. That's not necessarily a barrier to TPS, but it is if you traveled through another country, through that other country that you have dual nationality with before coming to the United States. So let's say you're from Venezuela, but you're also a Colombian national, and you went to Colombia before coming to the US. The firm resettlement bar applies to you because you entered a country where you can stay. Now, there are exceptions to that, and one exception is that you didn't have any real ties to Colombia, so it's possible to make an argument against it, and I would encourage you to speak to a lawyer if that's your situation. I'm certainly applying for some people who are subject to firm resettlement, but we're making arguments that they have no significant ties to another country and therefore should be granted TPS. And then there's also certain criminal bars to TPS, which if you have any sort of criminal history, you should also speak to an attorney. If you don't qualify for TPS and you're from Venezuela, you can still apply for DED. DED does not have these bars, but it has certain criminal bars. But that's always an option if you want to get work authorization. And finally, some people have asked if you have TPS, can you have TPS if you have another status? You know, like some people maybe are students, they're in F1 status, and they want to know if they can apply for TPS. Yes, you can apply for TPS and at the same time hold your student status, but you can't violate your student status. So, for example, student status does not allow you to work. TPS does allow you to work. You can register for TPS, but you can't get an employment authorization card because if you work, it's going to violate your F1 status. So depending on your situation, if you have an underlying status, you may want to keep it, you may want to not keep it. Again, it depends on your situation, but that's another thing about TPS.
Amir,
yeah.
Pardon me, I just want to jump in to give you a quick time check.
Okay, I think I'm done basically. So we're only 2 months into the presidency. There's been a lot of good changes. I've been seeing already. I've been seeing that the courts, you know, they've been more willing to terminate cases. I've been getting a lot of interviews scheduled more often now. It seems like things are beginning to roll in a good direction. But again, we're only 60 days into it. And, you know, I think just remain hopeful, but patient. So that's all I have for you. And I can answer any questions you might have.
Hey, I have a question.
Deepak, if I could ask you to wait one moment, I'll call on you first.
Okay.
But before we shift to questions, I want to thank Amir for this great presentation. And I also want to let everybody know that every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m., the REEF team is on Zoom. We have what we call drop-in hours, and you can just come by without having to make an appointment on Zoom and ask us any questions you have. So let me show you how to join that meeting. I'm going to share my screen briefly. This is the home page of our website. If you come to this page and you scroll down, you'll see this button right here. If you click on this button, Wednesday, anytime between noon and 1 p.m., it will take you directly into the Zoom meeting with the REEF team, and we can answer any questions you have there. So for the purpose of this question and answer kind of session, I'm going to ask that everyone please, let me rephrase that. If you have a question that's specific to your case, like it's, you know, it's the answer is not general, it's going to be very specific to your circumstances, please join the Wednesday meeting and ask us, because we can give you a specific answer, you know, that's based on your case and takes your specific factors into consideration. That will leave us more time now to ask more general questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Deepak, to ask your question.
Hi. So my question is like, my case was expedited when I requested for it. And then it's been like almost more than 3 months and still the decision has been pending. So why is this going to happen?
Mhm. Yeah, so after the asylum interview, usually it takes, when I see that it's a delay after you have your asylum interview, it's because they're running some sort of security checks. And I don't know why they would be doing it for your case. I don't know why they would be doing it really for, you might not know why they're doing it for your case either. But I've seen it take 2 months. I've seen it take 8 months. I even just had a client approved after 3 years of waiting. So he had had his interview, but it took them 3 years to do security checks. He was from Central America. I tend to see that they do that for young men from Central America more, but that's why your case is taking longer. They're doing security checks.
Yeah, but is it okay to take that long? Because my case was expedited. It's not the normal case. And I have sent them inquiry even after that.
So your case was expedited to have an interview, but
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be expedited for a decision. So I'm just saying, I'm guessing, that the reason why your case is taking so long for a decision is because they're doing some sort of security checks or doing some sort of background checks, and that can take longer. You can always email the office. I tend to email them every 60 days, just asking for an update on the case. It might do something, it might not do something, but you certainly have a right to do that. If it's taking an extreme amount of time, there's always litigation you can do to get a decision quickly, but that's something that normally angers the asylum office, so it should only be done in a case-by-case scenario. But there is something called a mandamus action where you can get a decision more quickly. So I would say your best thing to do first is to just email the office, say what your A number is, your receipt number, explain that you just want an update on your case. They will probably give you a very general answer, but that's what's happening. So just because your case was expedited doesn't mean that the decision's going to be expedited. Your interview was expedited.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seen a few questions in the chat that are similar. So I'm going to pose this question. If you've submitted your work permit application and you have FedEx or UPS tracking on it, and you know that it was received, but you have not yet received a receipt notice and it's stretching into, several weeks, what's the best course of action?
So if it's stretching, I guess several weeks means what? Because I've had receipt notices issued 6, 7, 8 weeks later for certain applications that have been submitted. I would say if it's an application based on something with a 30-day clock, I haven't experienced this myself, but I guess the first thing you could do is see if it's actually been processed, right? So if you submitted a check or you submitted it, well, I guess you wouldn't have a check if it was your initial application. So I guess you could call the National Customer Service Center with your name and your A number and see if they can find your EAD to see if it's actually even been receipted. But ultimately, that's been something that's been happening to lots of cases. For some specific cases that you can email a lockbox, I don't know specifically for, I can find out and we can get that information too if there's a specific one for, I'm assuming this is for an initial asylum EAD. If it is, I can try to find out. If it's for a renewal EAD and it's taking several weeks, it just might be taking that long. Yeah.
We have a couple more questions coming into the chat, but before I pose them, one thing I want to emphasize is that before you can make a service request, so if you're an ASAP member and you're applying for a work permit and it's been 25 days, as Amir pointed out, you can call and make a service request number and join the Rosario class action. You need a receipt notice to do that. So there are kind of two steps in this process. First, you need to receive your receipt notice, and then you wait 25 days from the receipt notice date, and then you call USIS. So it's important to get that receipt.
Yeah, and
go
the
ahead.
receipt notice date, it's not the date that they mail it, it's the date that they received it, because you're gonna get they're gonna, you'll get your receipt notice several weeks later, but go by the date it was received, which should be the day that they mailed it to you. Yeah, and with that, you should be able to get your case adjudicated.
Another question that's been posted in the chat is, why isn't there a short list available at the New York Asylum Office in Bethpage?
They just don't have one. I don't know what their internal procedures are, but they don't have one. Yeah, sorry, I don't have any insight into that.
I'm going to pose one more question from the chat. What do you think the likelihood is, Amir, of the Biden administration's proposal for a pathway to citizenship passing and applying to asylum seekers?
So I think what would apply to asylum seekers, the one thing that they proposed is amnesty. So they proposed amnesty for everyone who had been here unlawfully on a certain date, right? So that was one of their proposals. If something like that passes, it would apply to asylum seekers, because if you're here, you don't have status, right? So if yes, your asylum application might be pending, but you don't have status, right? So if something like that passes, it would definitely benefit asylum seekers, and you could just switch your case over to that kind of a case. I'm really hopeful something like that would pass, because ultimately that's what we need. We need some sort of amnesty based on the extreme delays at the asylum office, the extreme delays at the immigration court, the delays are unconscionable. I know, but it's just how it's become. So yes, that would benefit asylum seekers if it passes. But we have to see if something like that passes. I feel like something for DACA will definitely pass. I feel like maybe other things will definitely pass. Will full-on amnesty pass? I hope so. That would benefit. That would be the greatest benefit. But as of now, it's not there.
Nadia,
I have a question. Please, I have a question.
go ahead.
Yeah, I want to get a testimony to support my asylum case, but my relative in my country is afraid to go to a notary. So I just wish to find out, can a simple letter from him be acceptable at the asylum interview?
You just try your very best to get what you can. If someone's afraid to get it notarized, you explain that at the interview. I've had people give email correspondences because of something like this. I've had people, you just do the very best that you can do to get evidence. It doesn't have to be perfect evidence. It just has to be, and you can just explain the reasons why. Certainly don't put any family member in any danger to get evidence, and you can explain why that evidence is the way it is at your asylum interview.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Nobody speak French?
Marcus, are you there?
I am.
Yes, I'm here.
I do speak French. Que puis-je faire pour vous aider?
I'm speak French, so.
Je peux traduire, si vous voulez, Marcus. Je vais traduire, mais allez-y rapidement. Hein.
Ah, ok. Je voulais juste, moi c'est Wilson, je voulais juste avoir l'éclaircissement sur tout ce qui s'est parlé, parce que j'ai des problèmes avec l'anglais.
On le fera après, on ne peut pas le faire maintenant, s'il vous plaît. On fera après un résumé en français.
Ok, je voulais poser une question.
Ok, allez-y.
Je voulais savoir, parce que il y a une année qu'on est ici, je suis avec ma femme, et puis il y a 3 mois, depuis que j'ai demandé le permis de travail, jusque-là, aucune réponse. il y a ma femme qui a déposé le demande d'asile. Jusque-là, ils n'ont pas encore répondu. Nous voulons savoir qu'est-ce qui se passe au juste.
Okay, so the question was about this gentleman's been here for over a year and wants to know about the EAD, why it's taken 3 months. It sounds like you didn't become an ASAP member. So if you're not an ASAP member, EADs can take up to 6 months to be approved. So I would just, I guess, Maria, can you ask if this
Oui.
person was an
Bon.
ASAP member?
Oui, est-ce que vous êtes, vous êtes devenu un membre de l'organisation ASAP pour pouvoir avoir votre permis plus tôt, après 150 jours au lieu des 365 jours?
Bon, au fait, moi, quand j'ai déposé la demande pour le permis de travail, je n'étais pas le membre d'ASAP. Après avoir déposé, c'est par là que je suis devenu membre d'ASAP. Alors, j'ai aussi mon avocat appelé l'immigration pour leur donner mon numéro, que je suis un membre d'ASAP. Je suis devenu membre d'ASAP.
Vous avez un avocat aussi, n'est-ce pas?
Oui.
D'accord. So Amir, he is a member of ASAP and he has a lawyer.
But it sounds like you became a member of ASAP after you applied, so that's likely why that there are these delays. I don't know whether you need to reapply as a member of ASAP. You might want to just ask your lawyer if you can just refile, because you'll get an employment authorization in 30 days, regardless of the other application.
Alors, je traduis très rapidement. Amir a dit qu'il faut que vous demandiez à votre avocat, hein, c'est pour ça qu'il est là, pour qu'il demande s'il faudrait que vous fassiez une nouvelle demande. C'est à voir avec lui. Hein. Et bon,
Okay.
je vais vous couper maintenant parce qu'il y en a d'autres questions et vous pouvez...
Mais pour ma femme, vous ne m'avez pas répondu, s'il vous plaît. J'ai dit ma femme a déposé sa demande. Il y a demande d'asile. La demande d'asile, il y a 2 ou 3 mois comme ça. Jusque-là, ils n'ont pas encore répondu. Nous voulons savoir s'ils pouvaient répondre avec l'accusé de réception comme on le fait d'habitude.
Bon, comme a dit Amir avant, il a dit que des fois, ça met beaucoup plus de temps même pour recevoir le reçu du bureau de l'asile. Voilà ce qu'il avait dit aussi.
Ah, ok. Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie.
I'm going to turn it over to Tanzilia to translate a question that's been posed in Russian.
Yes, hi Amir. The question is from Jamila. After 7 years in the country, she applied for asylum recently and was called for interview very fast. And she found a lawyer, but the attorney says that she has a very little chance, almost no chance with this interview because there's not enough time to collect all information, all the documents right now. So what would you recommend? She has an interview on April 8th.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's in terms of, I don't know exactly what kind of evidence it is that you need to show, but it's up to you to explain what efforts. If you can't, you're going to have to try your very best to get anything. Again, the best way you can, whether it's an email from somebody or anything. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect affidavit, but I would really try hard to find any corroborating evidence you can. You don't need to corroborate everything, but something. And then you can always explain the efforts you made to get other evidence. So in your interview, they'll ask, well, do you have some sort of evidence of this? If you don't, because of the time crunch, then it's up to you to explain exactly what efforts you made to get that evidence and why you don't have it today. And I think that's the best you can do. You can also delay your interview. You can request one extension. So I would encourage you to do that one extension because it's your right to get one extension, and your lawyer can, or you can ask for that extension, and that'll give you a few more weeks. So maybe that'll give you the time you need.
I think another big concern that it's 7 years past, so that's she didn't apply during the first year, and that's why the attorney says that probably the chances are not so great because she missed the deadline?
Well, she needs an exception to the one-year filing deadline. So the very first, so it makes sense that they interviewed her so quickly because they have to interview people who miss the one-year filing deadline quicker. And the very first thing they're going to ask is, why do you meet one of the exceptions to it? So it's really up. So it needs to either be extraordinary circumstances or exceptional circumstances, whatever the case is. That's the very first thing the asylum officer is going to ask her about, and she really needs to try to get evidence of that. So if getting another 3 weeks is going to give her the time to get that evidence, then she should request an extension, because she can get it as a matter of a right. You know, and if she doesn't have that evidence or sufficient evidence, then it'll be referred to court. Yeah.
Джамила, я могу перевести или написать вам сейчас, как скажете. Вы поняли ответ или вам нужен перевод?
Great. Thank you, Tanzilia, for helping with that interpretation.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, she understands English, so but I will write the summary.
We have a few minutes left. Is there anyone who'd like to pose a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah. So my name is Jovana. I just want to ask a quick question. I applied on my own because I couldn't afford an attorney at the time, and they took the application in. But I've gotten feedback that it's not really strong and that needs extra evidence, which I've collected. I feel like since then, I applied in August last year. When do you think do you think I can submit that, like, additional evidence in a way? And when do you think is the best time to do that? Like when I'm like invited to an interview, or like, should I do it as fast as possible?
No.
For example,
yeah,
one of the things that I managed to get was the like a clinical evaluation.
Yeah, that's great that you got that extra evidence. Don't submit it now because they're not going to look at it. You submit it at least 10 days before your interview. So you'll get your interview notice, and then they'll tell you how to submit it to them. And you don't bring it to your interview, submit it 10 days before your interview, but you can just hold on to it for now because they're not going to look at your case until then anyways.
Okay. Should I send it to my local? I'm in Boston. Should I send it to my Boston asylum office?
Yeah, you're gonna send it directly to the local asylum office, but once you get that interview notice, yeah, that's when you're gonna send it. And I don't know about Boston, but they might even have an email address. Here I know you can email it, but so Boston might have the same. I don't know, but you'll see it in the interview notice. But hold on to everything, keep accumulating it, and you can send as much stuff as you want before your asylum interview, and that's totally fine.
All right, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Turn it over to Masab to pose the last question.
Yes, hi Amir, how are you? I think we spoke before, if you remember me, over the phone before, but I have a very quick question. The first question is about, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, the first question is about the waiting time, because I applied 2016, until now I didn't got interview. And if you remember, before the administration for Biden came, we spoke over the phone and we agreed that it might be next year for best chances. So do you think with Biden, the people that they applied like in 2016 or 17, they might have a chance to be like upfront now, or it will be the same system that they just look for the new cases? And this duration, like I'm waiting like 3-4 years. So this 4 years, it might be calculated from the nationality. Like if you got approved and you got the green card, you know, after green card, you have to wait 1 or 2 or 3 years to apply for nationality. Can they apply? Can they accept this waiting time as if calculation from nationality? So I can have green card. Let's say, for example, the interview agreed, and then I got green card, and then I have nationality after. And last question.
Yeah. So
Yes, this is my last question. Yes, one more and last one. I saw some of my colleagues, they applied for H1B1 while they are waiting for asylum. If they got approved for H1B1, they can apply for green card after this, during the waiting. Okay. So do you think this can be applicable for asylum? And that's it. Thank you.
Okay. So let me see if I can remember. So the first question's about the scheduling. As I said, as of now, nothing's changed.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anything about it changing. It might. it can be something they can change quickly, but I have not heard anything about it up until now. Your second question was about
waiting time will calculate from nationality.
I have to double check that, but no, I think it's 1 year after you actually are granted asylum. It's 1 year after you're granted asylum that you can apply for your permanent residence. I don't think there's any exceptions to it. I can't remember when you get your residence, whether it's backdated. It might be backdated. I can't remember right now, but it's definitely still 1 year after you get your asylum that you can then get your green card. And then normally it's 5 years after you get your green card that you can get your citizenship. For your last question, in terms of H-1B, to switch to H-1B, you need to have some sort of underlying status. So it would depend on the person's specific case. If they have an underlying status with an asylum application pending, then yes, they could switch to another status. If they don't have another status pending, I've only seen it in the context of an adjustment going to a green card. I haven't seen it in the context of an H-1B, where if somebody applied for asylum while they were still in status, they're considered technically in status. But I haven't seen it in terms of an H-1B. It might be the case, but that it would be very case specific on what their immigration status was prior to applying.
Do you think it was trying? Like if there's opportunity?
H-1B is over now. So H-1B was only through, you had to get in the lottery.
Excuse me, we have another last question, Amir. I'm going to read it. I'm sorry because Emma has some issue. Her internet is not so stable. Let me read it to you. It says, I have work authorization and social security card. Then my asylum case is pending for 3 years and 8 months. Is it possible for me to apply for a travel document?
Yes, you can apply for a travel document if there's an emergency reason that you need to travel. You can't go back to your to the country which you're claiming persecution from. Generally, it's inadvisable to travel, but yes, it is possible even when your asylum application is pending, if there's an emergency reason, to apply for something called advance parole, not a travel permit, not a refugee travel permit, but something called advance parole. But yeah, you can't go back to it. It would have to be for an emergency, and it's on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Any last questions? Otherwise, we are going to say a big thank you to Amir. It was wonderful that you were able to answer the questions. There's so many questions we had, especially on the backlog and the work permit. And now we really hope that they, first of all, gonna find a good solution for this backlog. And also maybe also for this overall immigration law and providing amnesty to asylum seekers. That's also an exciting, that would be wonderful too.
That would be the best. That would be the best solution. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So let's hope for that.
Everybody, let's hope, let's keep our hope, and listen, if you have any follow-up question, come back to us. And you know, if you need after another legal consultation with Amir, please get to you know, contact us, and we will make sure to follow up. Okay. Thank you, Amir. Thank you very much. And it was nice to see everybody. Emma, are you still here?
I am. Thank you, Amir. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll send out a recording of this video later today.
Great.
Thank you.